to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hi, Shobana. How are you?
Good. How are you, Hemali?
I'm good. I'm really happy to have you today on this
Aw.
episode of Up to No Good.
I love it.
So today's episode, we're going to be talking about pregnancies and everything that has to do with pregnancies and being a woman and your feelings throughout it. So I'm really excited to have you because I know this is something that you're pretty open to talk about. We talked about it on our live the other day too, and it just kind of happened to get into that conversation.
I know.
But it was a really good conversation, so I thought we should actually pre-record it and film it
Yes.
and share it with everyone, because I know it's problems that a lot of women go through, and it's nice to know that you're not alone in these situations.
Yeah.
So the first question I kind of wanted to start off with was, did you feel pressure to get pregnant? Did a lot of people always, after you were married, were people like, so when are you having a baby?
It's funny. When I was in my 20s, my parents, there was a lot of pressure to get married and have kids. That was all, that was, the craze. And then as I approached my 30s, the tune changed. And I guess my parents saw more of the relationships that didn't work out. And so the marriage pressure decreased. And when I told them about Mike and our engagement, they're like, are you sure? And I'm like, what? You have been asking me for 10 years. Are you kidding me right now? And then after we got married, I'm like, okay, great. Now the pressure of kids is going to come on. But then again, them and my family in India were all like, nope, just take your time. And I'm
Really?
like, yeah. I'm like, what's going on? I'm 33. What? You're not going to pressure me? So luckily at that point, I didn't feel pressure. People always used to ask us, friends and further away relatives, but that didn't really impact me. I think the decision that we made to have a child when we did was because, to be honest, it's because we're getting older. Children take a lot of freaking energy and work. Holy smokes. And it takes a toll on your body as a woman. And so that's why we decided to have Sophia when we did. But definitely in my 20s, I felt a lot of pressure to get married and have a child. And I think I put that pressure on myself too. And looking back on it, I wish I didn't do that, because I feel like you almost rob yourself of your 20s and everything that you can learn and accomplish and do, because that's a part of your life that you're literally on some kind of natural drug, And you're in your 20s. So enjoy it.
I mean, I don't know if I've technically gotten the pressure of getting pregnant. Obviously you feel the pressure of marriage. I felt the pressure of marriage. I think a lot of brown women do.
Yes.
Because one thing that kind of bothers me about that is especially as a woman, they'll always come up to you and be like, well, when are you getting married? When are you gonna have kids? Time is ticking type of thing. As if we're some type of time bomb.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's calm down. I'm still young. I still have some time. I'm and with how advanced medicine is now, you can have children a little bit later if you want.
Absolutely.
They'll still be fine, right?
Absolutely.
I understood the pressure when you were back in the day, because medicine wasn't as advanced. There was more complications.
Tons.
You couldn't you couldn't wait that long back then, but now it's so different. And I feel back then too, it was women weren't as career oriented, so it was different. It was a different dynamic.
Our gender roles were different, right?
Exactly. And as society has progressed, I don't think people's views on women has progressed with it, which is so weird, because we as women have progressed so much. And so why are our gender roles not aligned with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I feel when it gets back down to it, it becomes, at least within our culture, it becomes about the woman staying at home and the husband working, but we don't talk about the fact that the woman's at home managing the house but also working, right? And it's crazy and it's different. And I remember growing as I was growing up, that was the big thing. My dad wanted me to go to university, get a job, and then as soon as and didn't want me to have sex or be with guys. And then 21 hit and it's okay, when are you getting married? I'm like, what? What? You wanted me to get a job and now I have to get married? I thought you didn't want me to get married or have sex or be with guys. You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. I feel as a society, and especially I know our parents want the best for us. And I feel they have this, it's almost this robotic coaching that they have in their heads of, okay, all aunties and uncles, that's all they know sometimes in terms of what to talk about is when are you going to have kids, when are you going to get married, and that's it.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Cause like I feel the same way with my parents. Like my parents were all like, study hard, be independent, like
Yeah.
blah, 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 as I'm growing up. And then as soon as like I hit pretty much like after university, I would say, like when I was like 23 getting out of university, it was kind of like, okay, well, when are you going to get married? Like you need to find someone. And they started like trying to match me with people. And I
Oh
was
God.
like, okay. I'm like, I'm not really trying to be matched with anyone right
Yes.
now. And I was like, and I'm a really like ambitious person. Like I like to have a lot on my plate at all times. So I think my parents were just kind of like, oh, all she does is like think about work and she won't think about like having a family. And like as a woman, you know, you need to like do those kind of things and you need to start a family. And my mom has that conversation with me all the time. It's like, well, like, you know, as a woman, like you can't only think about work, you need to think about family. And I was like, why is this not a conversation that you have with men?
Oh
Like,
my God,
it's so weird. It's
exactly.
their family too. It's not like I'm just like popping out this child on my own. Like it
For
took
sure.
two, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm like, I find it odd that you don't have that same conversation with a man. And in their minds, it's like, well, you know, as a woman, there's responsibilities that you need to take. And I was like, I get that to a certain extent because biologically, obviously, there's things that we have to do for our children that men can't, you know, do physically, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, why are you training these men to think that, okay, you know, your job was to put a baby in her and then provide for the family and that's it? Like,
It is absolutely absurd. Yeah, it's
right?
absolutely absurd. And I feel like our parents need to change the conversation with the boys. Like I am lucky, and I feel like from watching you as well, you're also lucky that we have partners that play equal roles, if not more, right? Like my husband can do everything and he's an equal partner or more because you know sometimes he does more than me.
Than I can.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it comes down. It's the truth, and it's okay. And you know, I hear about people, you know, I have brides that might have sisters, and the sisters will literally come, you know, while I'm getting the bride ready, and they'll be like, okay, you know, I hope my husband's okay. And I'm like, why? Like, what happened? And they're like, oh, you know, he's never gotten a baby dress before. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He doesn't know where the diapers are. And I'm like, huh?
Yeah. And they'll be like, oh, I had to set everything up for him. I had to do everything for him. And so all he had to do was like, I was like, why though? I was like, has he never like taken care of his child? And like, I think a big part of that is just like, they haven't been trained to, right? Just as like we haven't been trained to. But I find it odd because it's like, people will like throw women into this role as if like we should just naturally know how to do it. And I'm talking if I have a child, so I don't really
That's
know
okay.
how it goes. But like from the people that I've talked to, like that are mothers, they're expected to just like get into the role. Whereas like I find that sometimes with men, like if they do one little thing, they're like applauded for it. Whereas like women, it's like
100%.
Well, no, you should just do that. And then if you don't do that, it's like they like mom shame you. They'll be like, oh well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And it's like, well, I don't see that same conversation happening with men. So
it's just like, I feel like that's how life is, right? When unfortunately, and this is not like a dig at guys, but I think it's just society that sometimes when guys take on roles that are traditionally women oriented roles, they're praised for it. Like, if, you know, Mike did a lot for Sophia, and you know, just a small example, just say he changed a diaper, right? People would be like, oh my God, that's like, he's such a good guy. Like he's changing the diapers and he's like waking up in the mornings and he's waking up when you're nursing and he's cooking. I'm like, yeah, like that's great. Like he is going above and beyond, but no one said, oh my God, amazing. You know, you're breastfeeding every day, your nipples are bleeding, but you're still going at it. Like, you know, no one says that because as women, we're expected to do all this stuff and we're not recognized for the trauma or the emotional pain associated with the physical, the mental, whatever it is. And it's because I really think that we don't talk about it enough as women, because there's so many women out there that truly are strong and can do it all 100%. But there's a lot of women out there like, I can't do it all for sure. And, you know, when we had Sophia, I was surrounded by I definitely had role models of women that like made it seem like you should be able to do it all. Right. But I told Mike at the very beginning, I'm like, dude, I am not that woman. I am not going to do it all. And you're going to be my partner with this because I knew from an emotional perspective that it was going to be a lot for me to manage. And I think it's okay to ask for help. And I think it's okay to ask your partner to be there for you because it's a partnership. Like we talk about like postpartum, and I know we're going to get this into this later on, but if you throw a woman into this singular capacity with this huge learning curve that might have just undergone a trauma, giving birth, lack of sleep, might not be able to breastfeed, and you put all the stress on her, and then we call it sometimes postpartum. I'm like, but if you put anybody in that position, they're going
to be traumatized.
You're going to be traumatized emotionally, mentally, physically. Like it's just going to be a crazy roller coaster. And there are some women, obviously, for sure, like if you've had anxiety or depression, there's some stuff that's hormonally related that should just will naturally cause postpartum in many of us. But I definitely think the chances of getting it are so much more heightened if you put this person in this high stress environment. It's insane to me that as a society that we call it sometimes postpartum, when at times could it just be a highly, highly, highly crazy stressful situation. Like, why are we treating it like it's something that's not normal? Like, why are we not treating it like, okay, these are all the factors in place that are causing this crazy stress on this person. How do we deal with it? And this happens to a lot of people because it's so unrealistic, right?
Mm-hmm. I know you talked about this a little bit before, but can you just give us your experience on postpartum? Like, what was it like for you? What kind of mental toll did it take on you? And have you heard any other stories, like from other women that may have had it worse than you, or have had it a little bit better than you, and kind of, I guess, compare?
Yeah, you know what, that there's so many aspects to that question. It's a very deep question, because in the first year or 2 years, there's so many different stages of post baby, right? And so in terms of just physically, you go into labor. A lot of women can get C-sections done. You're cutting through muscle to get to that baby, right? So there's trauma associated there. There's some women that can walk. There's some women that can't. And then you have the other option. I had Sophia vaginally. I had gone in and I was hoping that I wouldn't get an epidural, but that wasn't a pressure I wanted to put on myself. So I said, if I have to have it, I'm going to get it. And I think after like 12 hours into my labor, I was like, where is that doctor? I'm literally like, I was on the floor. I'm like, I actually think I'm going to die, because the contractions were really, 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 really bad at that point. And then I had Soph, and at the very end, like I had so many people in the room. Like I had a midwife, I had a doula, I had my husband, and at the very end, she had come out. They had to use, I think it was a vacuum, like to pull her out, because she wasn't coming out fast enough. And I tore. And so a lot of women tear. Mm-hmm. And when I say I tear, so basically you have like, your vagina, your cervix here, you have your pelvic floor here, and then you have your organs up here, like your tummy, your uterus, all that kind of stuff, everything else. The pelvic floor is so vital to our like stability and our strength, because it holds everything up from pushing down on us and like coming out. And so when you tear, your pelvic floor tears, okay? And I'm telling you this just because I think people need to know, and you never know how you're gonna have your child, right? Sort of the great myths of female health, that we just don't know anything about labor, or a lot about labor, I feel sometimes. And so some women will have the baby and they'll stretch, their pelvic floor will stretch. It's like, so the pelvic floor is here, the baby comes to the pelvic floor, and it's fine. Other women, if their pelvic floor isn't flexible enough, it has to tear, depending on how you have the baby. And that is probably the most painful thing ever in terms of recovery, because that is what holds everything up so that you can like walk comfortably. It's also what holds your bladder up, right? And so after having a baby, for example, my pelvic floor has weakened considerably. So my bladder now presses down on my pelvic floor. So whenever like I laugh or I sneeze for a good year, like I'd pee, right? And that's something that a lot of women go through, because I spoke to them about it and people just laugh it off. And I'm like, it's not funny. Like we have to do something about it. Yeah. So I saw like a pelvic floor health specialist. You can see a physio, a pelvic health physio before, to get your pelvic floor into shape. You can do stretches.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it. I still tore because you have to stretch even more. Like you have to do your Kegels, but your Kegels doesn't mean that you just sit up wherever you are. Like there's this myth that we just sit up and we just contract our vagina or our muscles, and then that's Kegels. You're supposed to lay down to do your Kegels. Oh. There's 3 point of contractions, from your bum, your anus, your actual cervix, and then also midway. So you need to get that right. And so pelvic floor health is so important. I didn't even know about the pelvic floor
I didn't know this. Well, I knew people tore, like I knew that
but
was
you didn't
a
know
thing,
what tears,
but I don't
right?
know what tears. I just
Yeah.
assumed everything tears. And
Yeah.
you know, it's like,
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
really know, and you don't know if you can prevent it. Like that was one thing that I didn't, I mean, maybe you can't fully prevent it, but like you could like help it a little bit, or maybe
Absolutely.
have it
You can help
tear
it a
as
lot
much,
by stretching
you
it out. Yep.
know? Yeah.
By
Yeah.
actually stretching out your pelvic floor.
I had
And this
no
is all, yeah. And start now, right? Because depending on if you want to have kids or when you have kids, you'll have years of stretching, you know, kind of in place.
Build up practice.
Yeah, exactly. There's like women on Instagram that can hold like certain weights, right? Connected to her.
Yeah,
like,
I saw that.
Yeah, exactly.
crazy.
Because that's her pelvic floor health. And it's so important. And so I didn't know about that. That's something that I learned. And I thought if I could start, I just didn't do enough work clearly because I was really tight there and then I ended up tearing. And so after that, I was trying to keep it a very natural pregnancy. Just because I don't like to take lots of medicines and chemicals and stuff. I just don't know the impact of it. That's just me. And so after that, I was drugged on Tylenol and Advil all day for like a few weeks because it was very challenging for me to walk. It was so painful, like the stitching. And I didn't have it worse because there's people out there that tear from the front to the back. So they can't go, you know, they can't go pee, they can't use the toilet as comfortably, and it's really painful. But I also was I think support's a huge part of this. And so I had my mom, I had Mike's mom, I had Mike, like I had a huge support system in place. And I also had a program in the hospital where every week for about 8 weeks, we would meet with moms that had babies at the same age. So we would go through everything together. So when I thought I was crazy because of the experiences or how I felt, I would go there and everybody was feeling the same thing. And I'm like, it's normal. But what I also learned is there were some like labors that were far more worse where, you know, women could have lost their lives, moms could have lost their lives, they were hemorrhaging, you know, so I feel like
scary.
It is very scary. Anything can happen. I mean, luckily we're in a place in our medical kind of journey that more women's lives are saved. But back in the day, I can understand why so many women died from childbirth, right? Because it's a huge trauma. But I just feel like as a society, we don't look at it as a trauma, right? We look at it as this beautiful blessing, which it is, but then we don't think about what did the woman go through. And then in 6 weeks, you're like, you're supposed to go back to work.
Okay, now go be a mom.
Yeah, right, exactly. Great. And you like push you in and you have this huge learning curve of no sleep. And you're learning, like when you're reading books and you're preparing for childcare and childbirth, you're kind of reading up till there. But then there's like all sorts of stages that happen every single week in terms of the development and growth of your child that at that point you also want to be able to cater to as well, right? And so people don't talk to you necessarily about parenting, how to parent, what's your parenting style, you know, things like that. And that's definitely something that's not a surprise, but like an awakening almost. Like, okay, now I have to actually be responsible for this child all the time.
Well, it's like one thing to like read it out of a textbook and then another thing to actually physically do it. It's like you went to school all your life and then someone tells you to go like start working now, and it's such a crazy learning curve. And I can only imagine this is worse because you prepare for it way less. You know what I mean? Like you're only preparing for it really when you find out that you're pregnant. And then you're thrown into and it's not just like a small little task. Like you're responsible for another human to survive.
It's a huge task. And there's people that are very capable having kids. There's people that are not capable that are having kids too, right? So how you manage that also depends on your general like ability, knowledge, learning of who you are as a person. And just because you give birth to a child doesn't mean you give birth to being a great mom, right? Like there's a quote, something along the lines of when you give birth to a child, you give birth to being a mom. But we're all humans. We have different capacities, and some people need more help than others. Some people are going to be better at it than others. That's the reality of it. And then we're upheld to some crazy standards. And I think, we have to sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you feel like moms are upheld to a higher standard than dads are?
Oh, for sure. 100%. I feel like you said before, I think as women, we're expected to do a lot of stuff. And I think people just top line it. Like you have to raise a child. You need to know how to you just need to breastfeed. But not everything comes naturally and not everything is as easy as that. And people don't ever as a society, especially within, I think, the South Asian culture, we don't talk about things. We don't talk about anxiety. We don't talk about depression. We don't talk about pregnancy. We don't talk about the hardships on women. We don't talk about problems in our marriage. We don't talk about anything, right? Like, it's a very proud kind of culture in which you just deal with your stuff at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the same thing happens with being a mom. Like, moms are just expected to raise kids. And I think when dads do something, because traditionally their role is seen, bringing in income, anything they do with a child is just amazing. Amazing.
bonus
Yeah,
points for
yeah.
them.
Like, oh my God, you're so lucky. You have a husband that changes a diaper, and
Well,
you're
I've
like,
gotten that too with like, oh, you're so lucky Ricker cooks. And I was like, okay, well, he probably should. He's like at this point, you know what I mean? And I'm
yeah,
like, I am lucky because I don't really cook and he does most of it. But like
same.
at the same time, I'm like, well, you wouldn't be praising me. Like you wouldn't like say that to Vikra
Yeah.
if I was the one cooking all the time. Like you
Yes.
wouldn't be like, wow, you're so lucky you have a wife that cooks. You know,
No,
like no one would
yeah, it's
say
an
that. That's so
expectation.
random. It's just an
Yeah.
expectation for us,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's like, well, why do you expect that to happen all the time? Like it's just I don't know, it's really confusing to me. Another thing that I actually wanted to ask you about before we like kind of end this off is like,
Yeah.
after you had Soph, did you feel like what was I guess your mental state after
Having Sophia.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
know you kind of talked about it,
Yeah.
but like what was it like, especially physically too? Like how did you feel? It's not just like the trauma of like you tearing, but like how did you actually feel about your body, right? Because like you're not just dealing with the pain, but like now your body has completely changed as a woman.
For sure.
How
And
did
your
you
body
feel
has
about
changed.
that?
So I'll say that my actual pregnancy was awesome. For once, I feel like my hormones all were in tune with each other. And I worked, because traditionally my hormones are, I feel like, out of whack. And then after I had Sophia, within the first like year, I had a huge support system. And so I was good. Like I was good afterwards. I have dealt with anxiety and depression in the past. And so I knew that I was prone to postpartum. That's what I was told. So I did see a therapist beforehand at Women's Health College. They have a therapy department for women that are going to have children. And anyone, I think you can get referred by your midwife or your doctor, and they'll just kind of help prepare you for having a child. And it was okay for me. I don't think I really vibed with my therapist as much, so I didn't end up going for too long. But that I think is really helpful if you do suspect that you might get postpartum. You can never tell, right? But if you have anxiety or if you've dealt with depression, they say the chances are a little bit more likely. So that's why I supported myself with like a lot of help. And I think
that's really nice to know, because I feel like some women probably are a little bit too proud, or like maybe they're not proud, but like they're the people they've surrounded with themselves with, they're just like, oh, why do you need to go to that? Like you're gonna be mom, like everyone does it. So like,
and people say that all the time. Like I know that there's that stigma out there. I'm 100% for therapy. I feel like, there's nothing wrong with getting help for your mental state. We get help for our physical state. And I think it's really sad that we don't give the same kind of importance or empathy for our mental state. I think there's still stigmas associated with it. We have a long way to go. But I'm all for therapy. I think people need to do what they need to do to feel better, get better.
It's a big part of it. Like just as much as you want to physically be okay, you need to mentally be okay too, because then it turns into like, oh, well, she's just crazy. She's just, and I'm like, well, maybe, maybe she's not crazy. Maybe there's obviously something, there's underlying issues that are there. And same with men too, right? Like they're just like, oh, he's just aggressive. Like that's how men are. They're more aggressive. They're more like, and it's like, no, you have a problem. Like there's something underlying in there that has to do with your past that you haven't like fully let go of yet, that you need to actually get help for, because there's a lot of things I think that we as people in general go through that is really traumatizing, that we don't even realize is traumatizing to us, that actually messes us up. And like as we go on in the future, those traumatic incidences subconsciously affect the way we act towards people. And I think you kind of touched on that, where it's like, well, I know that I had anxiety and depression in the past, so I'm going to do what it takes to like help prevent it a little bit better in the future. But I don't think a lot of people look at it like that. They're just like, oh, okay, well, that was the past, and you know, it's over with, like I don't need to deal with it. And you're constantly dealing with it regardless, whether you like it, whether you like it or not, it's gonna,
for sure.
gonna
Like,
come up.
I feel like at some point in your life, you just have to accept the reality of what it is that you are and what it is that you're dealing with. Like, I wish I didn't deal with anxiety. I wish I didn't deal with depression. I wish I had better coping mechanisms. I wish my hormones weren't crazy, but that's how it is. And then I feel like I'm always one that will seek help because I want to be better. You know, I feel like growth is everything. It's the only thing that keeps me moving. And if you're becoming a parent, I feel like I owe it to my child to be the best parent possible, because I'm going to be her role model, or her like first role model. And if I teach her coping mechanisms that are not good and, you know, are just destructive, then I'm going to be raising a human that's not going to be set up for the best of our ability in life.
Yeah,
right?
and you're just passing down at that point the generational trauma that you went through, which I'm sure both of us have experienced, especially as first generation kids. Like you get that generational, and I didn't understand that until like probably the last like 2-3 years of my life, where I'm like, okay, well, my parents obviously went through a lot of shit, and like they didn't have a way to cope with it. So it's just all been built up inside, and it's like I've talked to my parents about that too. I'm just like, okay, well, you clearly have been through a lot, like, and you take it out on us in certain ways. And I know you don't mean to, but like, it's pretty evident that you do. And they still are just like I told them, I'm like, maybe you should go to Reiki. Like, at least like, maybe it's not a therapist, but like get some type of like healing done that aligns with your needs. Right. Cause like, I think some people are like, okay, well, therapy is like helpful to some, but some people don't feel comfortable sitting in front of like a stranger and talking to them about their feelings, right? But I'm like, well, you need to figure out what works for you in terms of how you cope, so you're not passing that on to your kids and passing it on like generations to generations, because you see it's like a vicious cycle, right? Like
it is a vicious cycle.
And like, especially like, for example, domestic violence, like you see that passed on to generations.
For sure.
Right?
You learn, like your children learn behaviors. They say the first 5 years are the most important for development. And it's true. Like, I feel like even as I'm parenting Sophia, sometimes lines will come to my mind that I heard my parents say that I swore that I would never repeat or say, or, you know, even if they were subtle or not that harmful, like things that I didn't enjoy. But because that's what I experienced, it almost, that's what naturally comes to you sometimes, right? And so that's why, you're right.
That's all you know, right?
That is all you know, even if you know better. And I think sometimes with our parents, the problem is that you have to first accept the fact that there might be room for growth and development, and you have to have awareness. And I feel like parents of our parents' generation are proud, and they just refuse to accept that there might be an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think to them sometimes it can be like, oh, well, I'm older, I know more, and like I know everything, and I've been through a lot, so like I know. And I'm like, okay, I get that. Like, I'm sure you do know more. There's no way you don't. Like, I'm only 26.
You have more experience.
Like you've lived way longer than I have, but like at the same time, it's like you need to be able to understand where you're lacking and where you need help and all those things. And and I do think like our parents' generation were put through a scenario where you couldn't go out and ask for help, because it was more of like a pride thing, right? Like, oh, you need help, like what's wrong with you? You can't handle this by yourself. Everyone else is handling it by themselves. Like, you're the only one that's not. And like you said too, it's like you think you're going through something like absolutely crazy, and then you go and talk to other people and you're like, oh, it's actually normal. We just don't talk about it, so you don't know it's normal. Right? And I think that's the biggest problem, and a big reason why I wanted to do like series like this, because I feel like people should know it's normal, you know?
I wish I had this series when I was in my 20s and in my teens, because I dealt with everything on my own. I didn't talk to my parents about it. You know, at that point in time, I wasn't going to see a therapist or anything like that. And it was a really lonely place. So I feel like I'm so happy that you're doing this, because I think it's important for other women out there, because there's so many women out there at all different ages, to know that what they're going through is normal. You know, we all live on a different spectrum of hormones. We live on a different spectrum of capacities, and it's okay, right? Like, and by seeing other women that also live on spectrums, I think it's great, because they know that they're capable of so much more, and these are just journeys that they have to kind of take.
Right? I completely agree, and thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have one last question for you, and then we'll end it off there. your thoughts on breastfeeding, because I think
Yes.
breastfeeding is such a controversial topic, and I would love to know, especially like being a South Asian woman. Like I think women already get like talks about breastfeeding and stuff like that, about like, oh, you shouldn't be doing it in public, or like,
Oh.
you cover it up and all
Yeah.
that stuff, or like you as a mother, you should breastfeed because that is like what's the best for your baby. So yeah, just your overall thoughts on breastfeeding and how people treat you. If I don't know if you breastfeed in public, if that's something you're comfortable with, but like how people treat you when you are breastfeeding in public.
It's funny. I had, different opinions about this. I always try not to judge, but I definitely had different opinions about it before I became a mom. And so I wanted to breastfeed 150% because I felt like this is my opinion, I felt like my body was like, my body was made to create milk. And if it was functional and it was able to work that way for my child, I wanted to breastfeed because our body is able to create milk catered to that baby at different stages in its life, right? And it's natural. So that's what I wanted to do. And so when I breastfed, I found that I was lucky enough that before I had the baby, I had a number of women around me that had trouble breastfeeding. So I went into it knowing that it's not natural, because I think there's this misconception that breastfeeding is easy. It's just supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen, there's something wrong with you. And that's not the case at all, because there's so many women out there that, it's not easy for them. There's so many different factors, again, that go into breastfeeding as well. Just something as simple as like the shape of your nipple, the shape of your baby's mouth. Do they fit? Do you need some help making them fit together? Because sometimes, like with me and Soph, my nipples are shaped in like a different way. So I had to figure out how to maneuver them so that she could get milk without making me bleed. But for the first few weeks, I thought labor was painful. And then I had Soph, trying to feed, and it was like bloody.
And your breasts are probably like so tender too.
They're so tender.
Yeah.
But yeah, and because she was latching, like getting onto the nipple, we weren't connecting optimally, so my nipple was bleeding, and so it was really, really painful. And I remember every time before I breastfed, I would like eat candy to like numb my pain. I would cry, and then Mike would come every single time, bring me Sophia, like he was like my partner in this, and I would go to oh my god, I forget what it's called now, but it's like a breastfeeding clinic at my hospital, and I would go there every week to get help. And it helped so much, because there's breastfeeding lactation consultants that know how to help you connect, right? And so I always tell women that I talk to that breastfeeding may not come naturally. I don't want to scare you, but it's okay. And just make sure that you're aware of a lactation clinic in case you do really want to breastfeed, and you can. And then I also think there's women out there that don't want to breastfeed, they want to do formula, and I feel like at the end of the day, that's everyone's individual choices. I wanted to breastfeed if I could, and then I had formula as a backup in case I couldn't breastfeed. And the reality is that I tried to just set myself up for life. When I epidural, I was like, I don't want to have it. If I have to, I will. Yeah. I want to breastfeed. If I can't, it's okay.
You're not canceling out any options.
No.
You're just open to whatever happens. And I think that's kind of how you have to be in a situation like this, because it's like so foreign and it's so new, and it's such a big learning curve that you can't just like expect everything to go perfect because people expect it to happen. So
it is the biggest learning curve of my life, emotionally, mentally, physically, and that's with support. So if it's someone that does not have family or is doing it alone, I think it's a lot more challenging. And then in terms of like breastfeeding in public, honestly, before that, I didn't think I was going to breastfeed in public. But then afterwards, I'm like, I don't give a shit. My body has gone through heck. And my breast is literally a vehicle to give her food. So I am not going to hide it. So you know what, in terms of family and friends and stuff, I would put like a sheet over me just because I was more comfortable, because I knew other people were more comfortable, but I would never go to another location to breastfeed on my own. I'd breastfeed in front of people, but I'd just put like a little bit of a sheet on top of me. And I know that in itself isn't always traditional in our culture or community as well, but I didn't really care. And to be honest, in front of like my friends and like Mike and other people, I would just breastfeed openly, just because you become so not numb, but it's no longer it was no longer like a sexual object.
That's what I like. So that's what I don't think people fully understand, right? Because like I always like see people arguing, like being like, oh, you know, you're just going to have your breasts open like that in public and there's people around and how embarrassing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not saying that to like the half naked Instagram girls that, you know what I mean? That are posting pictures. And I'm like, I'm really confused. I'm like,
that's
and I'm
so
like,
true.
you're literally feeding. Like, it's not like you just have your boob out
You're just like hanging out with your
like
boob.
what's up, you know, like there's literally a baby attached to it. If you're still sexualizing it at that point, like, there's kind of something wrong with you. Like,
absolutely. And that's what Mike would say. He's like, it's not you that, like, you know, okay, he's like, I just don't want other people, you know, looking at your breasts and sexualizing it. I'm like, I don't care, it's so gross. I'm like, I'm feeding a baby, and if they're sexualizing that, then that's their problem.
Weird.
And it doesn't.
So weird.
But isn't it funny though, in a society that we're okay with having half naked women in ads on Instagram in any way that's sexualized, but the moment that we're using that same sexualized breast to feed a baby, it becomes a problem.
That's what I don't get. I logically do not understand that, because I'm like, how does that make any freaking sense? Because first of all, that's kind of what your breasts were made to do. Like, that's the purpose of it. It's not there to be like, look at my boobs, like, you know what I mean? It's there to feed your child. Like, that's the point of them. That's why they fill up with milk. That's why they're like that, right? But like, I don't know, it boggles my mind. That's why I wanted to know your opinion on it, because I'm just like, how can people be so like, oh my God, that makes me feel so uncomfortable. I'm like, did you not do, like, when you were a child, did you not do the same thing? Did your mother not go through the same issue? And it's like, okay, well, what if you, like, and I think men say this more than women do, but I think women will probably, I don't know. I've never breastfed in public, so I can't really say to that, but it's just based off of like what I've seen. But it's like, you know, if your kid needed, like, if that was your kid and they needed food and you had no other food, like this was the only food that you could provide them, like, would you not like let your kid be breastfed in public? Like, I'm really confused. And it's like, and then it's like, well, why don't you just go to another room or go somewhere else? And I'm like, okay, well, I don't really want to like breastfeed my kid in a bathroom. Or
why
like,
should you have to do that?
Know,
like why should you be uncomfortable or excluded or isolated because you're breastfeeding?
Yeah, especially after that freaking baby ripped your vagina open. And like,
and now you're trying to now isolate me, like,
and it's like something that you guys, like, as a society want, like, you want people to have children and families and be in this, like, you know what I guess way of living. So why all of a sudden is it like not okay for you to do something that's actually so natural to do, you know?
Maybe it's because it challenges our view of the sexualized breast as a society, right? It challenges how we see it.
But I feel like that goes back to like all the like, don't show skin, it's like bad, men are gonna like look at you, and people are gonna think you're like this way and that way, and you're just like, bruh, what do you want me to do with my boobs then? Like, they still exist. Like, what do you, and then you cover it up and you're a prude, and if you don't cover it, then you're a whore. And it's like, well, where's the balance?
And it's just crazy because we have to be everything to everybody. That's what it comes down to, right? And so I think, and breastfeeding, I feel like it's just a whole other it's a whole other ballgame, but it shouldn't be. Like, what's the big deal? You know, what's the big deal? I think to each their own. I just wish we would just take it easy on our women out there, you know? And
man, we're like already going through so much. Like, just let us be, just let us live. Like, stop picking us apart. And help us. Because like, sometimes it just feels like we're going through this whole thing by ourselves, you know?
Yes, and we're judged if we step out of that like perfect norm. And I think because that's the society I feel like we still live in right now, is that we have like the society we want to believe, and we want to believe life exists in a certain way, but then we have the realities, and for some reason,
this picture perfect world. And especially I think with women, like, you're supposed to fit in this like picture perfect world. Like, you're an accessory to this world, and if you don't fit that image, then like, why do you
it makes
exist?
me feel I feel uncomfortable if you don't fit that image, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it was great talking to you about this. I really, really enjoyed it. I think a lot of women will benefit off of it, so thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy I could have you, and we will talk soon.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, bye.